postal or electronic, there are a number of variables that can cause the problems with the system. But we've got insurance. So, for instance, if we did go to electronic voting and there was a breach of the company that a breach of their systems, we're saying that they're all care but no responsibility because our insurance, which we're paying will pay for a breach of their system.
Specifically, that I need to defer to Steve.
And we're party to that insurance as well, but in terms of all care responsibility, I don't think that would be quite the case. We have a business to run and reputation is everything, so we certainly don't want to be party to something that didn't work.
Well, we don't want to be, we want a budget that we can, and an amount that we can kind of save our ratepayers, because as you know, this city is under pressure financially. So the last thing we want as a council, and I think I can speak for all of my colleagues, to go into an agreement that something's going to come up another 30% above or whatever. So I want clear figures or as close as I can.
Yeah. So I think the answer is that it had to be rerun, and the worst case scenario, insurance covers it.
In terms of, can I just go to one step further for the questions that you're asking, Councillor? The $240,000 that we have on the table at the moment is predicated on the group of 10 taking part in the election, with authorities like Christchurch and Wellington and Dunedin being cornerstones. If there are only to be 4 or 5 local authorities take part in the trial, then that sum would have to be revisited.
Okay, so.
And distributed amongst just those ones.
Sorry?
And distributed amongst just those participants.
Correct.
And so the temptation is always just to hand back the other people the initial risk and then see what works and go later, isn't it?
So that wasn't clear in paper. Yeah.
Sorry, that wasn't the question. Sorry. I should have been more specific. Apologies. Andrew.
I've got 3 questions, and I'll keep them as brief as I can. You talked initially about a so-called vulnerability in the New South Wales state election, which you then referred to as a vulnerability. Are you able to tell us a little bit more about that vulnerability and how it could have been exploited and what the results of that could have been?
Yes, certainly. I welcome that opportunity, actually. When the New South Wales Electoral Commission put this together, they also wanted to monitor people's habits when they went online to the site. You may all be familiar, or perhaps you're not, but there's a thing called Google Analytics, which tells you how people use your website. They didn't use that. They used a thing called Pickworks, which is a private company that does essentially the same service. So when someone visited the Electoral Commission site, it also sent a query off to the Pickworks site. It was the Pickworks site that had a less than current, it wasn't right up to date security certificate. That's the vulnerability. If someone could have gotten in anywhere, they would have messed around with some analytics, not votes. So it's a great question. Thanks for raising that.
All right, thank you. Second question, this is a very simple one. It's maybe one that Darryl can answer. Darryl, you mentioned that the insurance premium would increase if we went with online voting through the trial compared to the premium that we pay at the moment. Would it be fair to say that that means that the insurer would see a greater perceived risk in online voting than paper voting?
We only had discussions with our brokers last Friday, and that's on the basis of negotiating our insurance for the 2016 elections on a national basis. We have effectively one policy that covers every local authority, and the indications that we've had from the insurers who the brokers are currently dealing with is that the brokers are very keen to continue with the arrangement with ensuring local authority elections, and that the premium for including an online option is actually effectively a nominal sum. So no, I don't believe, I think they have accepted that the risks that they're covering are in fact not a hell of a lot greater than the risks that they cover anyway to have to rerun any election. That doesn't cover a recount. That's something else that we're currently negotiating for insurance for.
Okay, now that's fine. And then I just wanted to pick up on Tim's line of questioning and thinking of the contractual relationship between the council and elections.com. Obviously, elections.com have done this work for the council, which is work that council pay elections.com to do. Is that arrangement already in place for 2016? Are elections.com already contracted for the 2016 election, regardless of the outcome of this debate?
Correct. In fact, they've been advised that that the contract that we currently have covers an extended period because we need to have that certainty in place. But we will be going to the market following the 2016 elections for future elections.
All right. Now, we've also talked, and again, in answer to Tim's question, we talked about the 150,000 being the cost of the additional mail-out, 240,000 overall being the estimated costs if we go with the online option. That leaves, obviously, a $90,000 difference there. I'm assuming that would be additional charges from elections.com to the council. And I'm interested in, like, as we move forward and make savings by not using the postal option to such a great degree, does that mean as the amount we're spending on postage decreases, the amount that we're spending on services from elections.com or another provider would increase? I'm just interested in what the incentives for the various outcomes might be, I guess, if I'm being honest about it.
I can comment that some of the external costs that we have for postage and mail-outs will vary. They are again, we have a national contract with a postal services provider. Those bills come through elections.com, but they are officially part of our costs. But you might like to comment on your charges.
Yeah, sure. And especially when it comes down to this, configuring the infrastructure required for the first time of online voting, call it a pilot or call it a trial, I don't really mind. The sorts of infrastructure we're throwing at this is very big, and that comes with a price. It will consist of two data centres, Tier 3, which is the best you can get in New Zealand. One will be in Auckland, one will be in Christchurch. They'll have built-in redundancy within both of those. We have built-in redundancy ISP pipes going into them. So we're throwing an awful lot at this, and that comes with a price. We don't know if that's way too much. We won't know until the trial is completed, but we think it's better to have a very big sledgehammer for the first time through. So the costs, the positioning of the costs will become more fine granular as we know what to expect. Like one of the things we don't know, for instance, and this is why I think calling it a trial is not that inappropriate. One of the things we don't know is the voting patterns when it goes online. We know the voting patterns very well for postal voting, and the unit of measure for postal vote is really per day. We know when we get our peaks and troughs, and there's always a peak at the end. We don't know what that's going to look like online, and the measure of unit will be down to the second. So we're throwing an awful lot of resource at this to cope with what we think will be a reasonable amount to cope with at any one time. Of course, at any one time is throughout the whole 3-week voting period. So we're building something which is staying at the peak for 3 weeks. So there are costs, but just because it's the start, really, until we gain some more information and know how those voting patterns are going to eventually look like, we're not sure. But having said that, we can actually ramp up further with our providers. So if we find that things are grinding slow, we can throw more resources at it as well.
I'm going to run a scenario, and I'd just like you to comment on it. We know that systems can get compromised. We know that many people in New Zealand actually have online personalities and so forth. So there's lots of information of who we are actually out there online. We know there's a very low voter turnout. So this last election we had 42% turnout. So there's 58% that don't vote. And that's probably always going to be the case unless we change something radically. So there's always going to be a large portion of the population that will not vote. So the PIN system that you have in place is susceptible to, at this point, as we know, because we don't know how much is going online, 58%. It could be compromised, and you'd never know because it's only going to be, the PIN's only going to be entered once. Those people aren't going to vote anyway. So if you sort of see where my scenario is going, there's 58% at risk of compromise. Now, also online, also we know that the information around who votes and who doesn't vote, that will be known. It'll be somewhere. Someone will have that statistical data of what genre, what type of person does not vote on average. Every single election, they'll know that information as well. So if a hacker got into the system, found that information out, they could with some certainty actually place a vote with an individual PIN number, knowing those people aren't actually ever going to vote and they'll never get found out. So I'd just like you to comment on that.
Sure. Part of the mitigation against those various scenarios is we won't do what Washington DC did, for instance, and leave a PDF of all the PINs and the passwords sitting on the server, which was not a very good idea. We can't, and we also don't allow votes to be changed, so you can't come in and vote using a PIN and come back in later on and vote again, which is the Washington DC thing. The protection of the PINs and passwords is taken very seriously, to the extent where on the voting pack that goes out, there'll be one piece of that information. The other piece that's required to log in is actually coming from another provider. So we never give the PINs and passwords to two other providers, or to any other provider. There's only one bit for one bit to the other, who will lodge it and put it in the post to go out to the public. The PINs and passwords, when they're in the database, are encrypted. The security measures that are in these Tier 3 data centres, like that's physical as well as technological barriers to get into, even if that gets breached, then we monitor where the votes are coming from at a technological level. So we have IP address monitoring. If we see a whole bunch of votes being cast from a particular location, we start showing interest in that. We've also got the paper votes to compare against. So if we start seeing a big sway away from the trend which is in the paper vote system, and we've got a great comparison right there. And if we start seeing those sort of discrepancies, red lights start flashing, we start investigating what's going on. So there are various mitigations methods that we have already planned for that very scenario.
Elaborate on that last point that you said, that we're doing this to try and increase voter turnout is one of the reasons, but if we see a huge online voter increase, that'll be treated with suspicion.
If it's huge, then we're not. It's going to be interesting to see what it's going to look like. We are, of course, hoping that at certain age groups that they will pick up on it, particularly the younger voter will pick up on it, who probably isn't voting at the moment. They're not bothered with putting an envelope in the post. If you said huge, if we started saying 100% voted online, I think we'd start getting interested in that.
But how do people actually get their PIN number in the first place? Is that emailed out or posted?
No, it's posted.
You've
There are no emails involved.
So you've still got
Secure
that
as the
postal
letterbox.
component.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Posted, yeah.
That could be
And
something that's
secure
developed
letterbox.
further on, but yeah.
And look, the evolution that I talked about before, the model that's being proposed is not unusual. It's just the first step. And then ultimately go with pre-registration that says, I want to opt out of the postal side, I just want electronic, and that's when the cost savings kick in.
You have a comment on one of the submitters said security and anonymity are at odds. Do you have a comment around that statement?
Security and anonymity.
Related to banking, which is not anonymous but very secure, voting online, which is very secure but
anonymous?
Well, we do it, so I'm not sure.
Okay, I'm just going, Yanni, quick question.
It's more a question of Daryl, and just one of the things that the submitters touched on, which I thought was a pretty good point that we needed to question, was just around the public consultation. Given that this is quite a significant change to the way in which we do the elections, and the fact that we've had no public engagement or consultation with our community as to their preferences, I just wondered, whether how we kind of applied that test, because it did seem to me that given the interest, the huge interest in a short period of time, whether or not we should really be consulting with our community over their preferences in this regard, given the different concerns that have been raised.
I would, in general, my background would always say we should take our community with us whenever we do anything. And certainly the Online Voting Working Party, when it came up with its report, indicated that if a local authority wanted to move to an online voting system, there should be public consultation. We're not moving to an online voting system. We're actually moving to an option for online voting. So the community will have their choice whether they continue to vote online, whether they continue to vote through the postal system or choose to try the online voting system.